Both are beautiful. And 2 out of the 3 people that sang it were also beautiful. Oh, sorry, Hunter. I didn't mean to say that.
Yeah, you did.
But you were the most handsome one up there.
I know I am.
I know I am. That's cool. He knows it. I love it. I know I am. Well, I spoke to everybody this morning. Except one person. I'm going to speak to them now. Hello, Mr. Dennis. Good to see you here. May your heart leap within us when you walk in the door. Except Patricia, she was looking this way. She didn't see you. But I'm sure her heart leaped as well. So we're glad to have you, man. We're proud of you. This morning I'm going to preach about 2 women in the Bible. And then I'm going to, near the end of the sermon, to talk about 2 very special women. And it's going to be intertwined with some current events that are going on right now in South Carolina. And I'm going to be talking about one of my heroes. I won't tell you who that is yet. But there's another little section I want to read in the book of Galatians to try to tie this together, which is talking about the fruit of the Spirit and why these women in the Old Testament went different directions, one toward God, one away from God, and why the 2 women in the live illustration both were very faithful to God. This would have been a good summer to preach on Mother's Day. It all just came together this week, so it won't be a Mother's Day sermon. So I want to turn to the book of Galatians, if you will turn there, please. And if you'll turn to the 3rd chapter. I'm going to be beginning to read with the 22nd verse. It's the fourth chapter. 4th chapter of Galatians, not 3. 4th chapter, and the 22nd verse. Did he fix the slide up here? And this is kind of a story about the history of the Hebrew people. And it's also, it marks a historical dividing line between those who are Christians and the way that Christ came, and those that went away from Christ. There are those that believe that when this incident happened, that it was the beginning of a continuation which ended up in the Arab people becoming their own people. And the punishment for the sins that were committed have been carried out ever since. Now, I don't know if we can go so far as to connect that with the birth of Muhammad and his teaching of Islam, which is a repudiation of the Scripture. It's an adding on to of our Scripture, since it came some 500 more years after the Bible was written. But nevertheless, there are curses involved in particular sins that take place. And whether that be the case or not, there is a historical story here that we'll be reading this morning. And it begins in the 22nd verse of the 4th chapter of Galatians. It's finished, for it is written that Abraham had 2 sons, the one by a bondmaid, the other by a free woman. Now I'm not going to turn back to the Old Testament for lack of time, and read all this. I'm just going to tell you about it. But Paul's talking about the fact that the beginning of the Christian faith began with God calling Abraham. And Abraham was the beginning of the journey of the Jewish people in a physical sense, in a national sense, but also in a spiritual sense. And there was a dividing line that happened here. The book of Romans talks about the spiritual Israel and the physical Israel. The spiritual Israel is that part of Israel and that part of the Hebrew children who were spiritually converted and saved. The others were those that were not saved, who were Hebrews, but they were the members of the Hebrew Jewish nation. It's two separate things. And this is the particular instance this morning that made that divide between the two. It says that Abraham had two sons. One son was by a bondmaid and one by a free woman. And as you remember the story of Abraham, him and Sarah wanted to have children, but they could not have children. And so they continued to try, but they never could have children. But God made a promise to Abraham and Sarah and said, "You will have a son." Abraham decided, along with Sarah, that they would not be patient and they would not wait until God opened the womb of Sarah, that they could be given a son of promise that God planned to give them. And this is a very relevant situation in our day and time. It's relevant to we who are Christians, and we too are also lost. Every time that we begin to take things into our own hands in every situation and do not wait upon God to show us the direction to go or to bring about in our life what He sovereignly wants to bring about, we get in trouble. We get in a hurry sometimes. We want to do things ourselves, and we get in the flesh. And when we get in the flesh, things can go awry. When we wait on God and are patient and obedient, and let God work in our life to fulfill His will, then things will go wonderfully. They may not be smooth, there may be difficult times, but if we're in the will of God, everything is going to be all right. Amen. That's the key. So we'll look at the next verse. They were in 23, but he who was of the handwoman was born after the flesh, but he that was of the free woman was by promise. Now, here's where the story continues. Abraham and Sarah went against the will of God. They were in a hurry, and they decided that they would bring a woman, Hagar, into their home to live, and that she would bear a son by Abraham. Not a Hebrew woman, not a woman of the promise, and certainly not a potentially saved woman. And so they brought a stranger in, which was against God's rules to begin with. They failed to have confidence in God that He would provide a son as He had promised them. And they created their own son through the union of Abraham and Hagar, the bondwoman, the slave woman. And thus the son was born. But then later, in spite of that, God still blessed them and gave them a son, and the son was born unto Sarah by Abraham, as God opened Sarah's womb. And this was the son of promise. This was the son that God would take the seed down to Jesus through. And 24 says, which things are an allegory for those, these are the two covenants. The one from Mount Sinai, which gendereth to bondage, which is Agar. For this Agar is Mount Sinai in Arabia, and answereth to Jerusalem, which now is and is in bondage with her children. And to this day there is a divide between Esau and Jacob and those two tribes and those two lineages. There's a divide today in Israel and the Arabs that live on the West Bank and all the other Arabs around the world, and those who, especially who have embraced another religion. And so it says that Jerusalem, which is above, is free, which is the mother of us all. Verse 27, for it is written, rejoice thou barren that bearest not, break forth and cry, thou that travailest not, for the desolation hath many more children than she which had a husband. Now we, brethren, as Isaac was, are the children of promise. Isaac became the child of promise. And Isaac was the child which the bloodline of Jesus continued through, and which eventually led to salvation. And so there's a division there. Now we, brethren, as Isaac was, are the children of promise. Verse 28. And 29 says, but as then he that was born after the flesh persecuteth him that was born after the Spirit, even so it is now. When Hagar was moved into the household of Abraham, Sarah had to endure mockery and rebuke and all kind of abuse by the bondwoman Hagar. The Bible says that she would come to her and would mock her and tell her that she couldn't have a child and that she was barren. And it was very uncomfortable, a very awkward situation the whole time that was going on. And then when the child was born of Hagar, God intervened and Abraham put Hagar out of the house and put the child out of the house with her, Ishmael. And he kept in the house Sarah and Isaac, the son of the promise, the son that God had given to him. So if God's going to make a promise to you and God's going to give something to you, you don't want to mess that up by abruptly creating another circumstance where you have a secondary inadequate excuse for the original thing that God was going to do for you. Verse 30, nevertheless, what saith the Scripture? Cast out the bondwoman, which I just explained, and her son. For the son of the bondwoman shall not be heir with the son of the free woman. You could not have two heirs to the promise. You could not have a line of succession from Abraham down to Jesus, generation after generation, bloodline after bloodline, the same bloodline from Abraham to Jesus, if you had two different sons. If you had one son who was born out of the will of God, and if you had another son that was born within the will of God. And Isaac was born within the will of God. He was the promised child, and his bloodline would be the one that would go down through history and culminate with the birth of Jesus. So there were two women involved. Things did not turn out so well for one woman, and the other woman was blessed. Verse 31 says, "So then, brethren, we are not children of the bondwoman, but of the free." And as he begins to talk about that, and he begins to tell them that this is the true Israel, the spiritual Israel, then it brings him to the point in chapter 6, where Paul begins to talk about the fact that there is a difference between the bondwoman and the free woman. There's a difference between the son born out of wedlock and the son that was born within wedlock. There's a difference between the son that was conceived in sin and was not pleasing to God, between that son and the son of promise, Isaac, who was the promise of God, and that God birthed into the world according to his will. There's a difference between all these things. And even in verse 5, he talks about being in the Spirit, walking in the Spirit, and walking in the flesh. In verse 16 of 5, he says, "This I say then, walk in the Spirit, and you shall not follow the lust of the flesh." So my point is that in the Old Testament, all these things transpired, these historical, documented things happened, and they had a direct bearing upon what happened in the New Testament. They had a direct bearing upon the things that are happening to us today. We have one group going one way, another group in the will of God going a different way. And those that are not of the promise, and more of the promise of Abraham and Isaac, are not Christians. And they have evolved into all different religions which despise Christ, and they are a sinful race. And he's talking about those people as people of the flesh. And the ones that walk in the Spirit are the ones that are Christians today. And so all this took place, but I want to keep in mind those two women. But he says in chapter 6, as he follows this out in the New Testament, what is the result of the actions in the Old Testament? You now have a group which are the non-elect, which are living in sin, divorced from God, separated from God. And you now, because of the promise of Isaac and the obedience of Abraham in that sense of finally having a child and having it be Isaac, that now you have the elect. And if you carry the doctrine of election back to the Old Testament, it is obvious that the elect child was Isaac, that God elected to be saved, and he elected him to be the carrier of the bloodline down to Jesus. The other, Ishmael, was rejected. He was a non-elect person. And so, now that we're in the New Testament, and now in verse 6 we're seeing, how then shall an elect person act as in opposition to a lost person? Are you going to get saved and then remain like you've always been? Are you going to get saved and continue to act as you always have? Are you going to become saved and act the same way that everybody else who is lost acts? Or will there be a difference? Will you act differently? Will you think differently? Will you reason differently? And he treats this. In the 5th chapter, he talks about all the various sins that the non-elect live in. And then in verse 22 he says, "But the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, long-suffering, gentleness, goodness, faith, meekness, temperance. Against all these there is no lie." If we live in the Spirit, let us also walk in the Spirit, says verse 25. And so there's a distinct difference between the two types of people. Chapter 6, verse 1 says, Brethren, if a man be taken out of fault, ye which are spiritual, restore such a one in the spirit of weakness, considering thyself, lest thou also be tempted. He said, a Christian will be different. A lost person, a lost world, when a person has a misfortune or falls from grace or falls into sin, they will pile on them and they will push them further down and they will destroy them. A Christian, he says, should realize that it could be you. And because of that, you should restore the one that has fallen. Lift them up. If some people have not done as well in their life as other people, that doesn't mean they're worse than the other people. Because believe me, every single person has sinned. Every single person fails. But some fall a little quicker, some fall a little earlier in life, some fall into the pit a little deeper. But that don't mean they can't be taken out of the pit. That don't mean they can't be lifted up. That don't mean they can't be forgiven. My father was way down in the pit. And bless his heart, God touched him and saved him and lifted him out of the pit. And he became one of the sweetest, most gracious Christian men that you'll ever meet. So he's saying, don't attack people when they're down, but forgive them of their faults and lift them up and set them on solid ground and help them to be able to put their life back together. That's what verse 1's basically saying. It's our job as Christians to be a comfort to those others, to lift them up, to encourage them, to strengthen them, to believe in them, and help them to get on their feet. And only God can do that ultimately. And God, if He so chooses, will certainly do that. And He can overcome any obstacle that's in the way. It doesn't matter how bad a shape a person is in. He can conquer all by Jesus and the power of the Lord Jesus Christ and overcome any weakness. By the way, I forgot to tell us the sermon title today, which was a really dumb thing. The title of the sermon is, I don't want to miss this because it's important, is Sycamore Street. The title of the sermon is simply 2 words. Sycamore Street. And as I close, I'm going to tell you about Sycamore Street and how it fits into all these things we're talking about. And I just became aware of Sycamore Street yesterday. And Sycamore Street is located in Charleston, South Carolina. And I'll tell you about that in just a moment. But verse 2 says in chapter 6, bear ye one another's burdens, and so fulfill the law of Christ. If a man think himself to be something when he is nothing, he deceiveth himself. It says, don't be egotistical, don't have a big head and think you know everything. And then he goes on, I'm going down to verse 7. 7 says, be not deceived, God is not mocked. For whatsoever a man soweth, that shall he also reap. For he that soweth to his flesh shall the flesh reap corruption. But he that soweth to the Spirit shall the Spirit reap life everlasting. That is a true law of God that God has created and instilled into mankind. And it is a law which cannot be changed, cannot be altered. It always is going to work. Whatever a man sows, he will reap. That's not just a saying. That's a law, and that is a pronouncement And that is a decree that God has made that will never fail. It always is in effect. Whatever a man or a woman, since we're politically correct in our church, a man or a woman does, that was a joke, whatever a man does, and a woman does, whatever he sows, he will reap. If you do good, you will sow goodness and blessings. If you do bad, you will sow bad, and you will sow punishment, and you will sow negative results of that bad that you did. That's what happens to people. People that are not Christians throughout their life, once they begin to do one bad thing and they get away with it, then they do the next bad thing, and then no matter what part of evil that it is, it will grow and multiply and become worse and worse and worse. It's a vicious cycle. If you do evil, you will sow evil. And if you continue to do evil, the evil will multiply and magnify, and you sink deeper and deeper and deeper. If you do good, if you're a Christian, if you try to serve the Lord and please Him, and get your life right with God, and you do good things, righteous things, God will bless that, and He will multiply that, and He will make your life better and better and better. And you may not get rich, you may have problems still, but you will have a better life because you will be living for Christ, and He will be blessing you in whatever way that may materialize. Now I want to talk about Sycamore Street in closing. Remember the two women I talked about in Galatians, Hagar and Sarah. They were women, one of the promise, one not of the promise. One woman caused great damage to all of her posterity. Another woman caused great blessing to all of her posterity. I want to talk about two women this morning who have done good things, they have sowed good things, and they have reaped good things, and they've reaped results. And I want to talk about Sycamore Street. You know, there are many things in the world which are neutral. They're neither good or bad. But however a person uses those particular entities will make them good or bad. Sports is one of those things. I love sports. Since a small boy, I was involved in sports. My parents were. My mama used to sit in front of the TV and watch wrestling with me and my daddy, if you call that a sport, on Saturday night. And she would watch Ric Flair and all these guys. And me and Daddy would always sit behind her because it was more fun watching her than it was the wrestling. It was a blast. And we'd be sniggering and laughing, oh. And she'd get into it, boy. She'd say, you low down dirty dog. She's every single word. Why come they always jump on that one poor old guy? And why come they always beat him up and then they beat him up again? Why can't somebody do something? Can't you do nothing, Virgil? He said, no, I can't do nothing. And she would really get into it, man. And if you knew her, very gentle, very quiet, very peaceful. But buddy, you turn wrestling on, she evolved into a monster. And it was all right. But we do that. We watch the football, we watch the basketball. And you know, I found that sports is one of those neutral entities. It's neither good or bad. It's just there. Golf, for instance. Brother Cross understands why I'm talking about golf, and some of the others of you, Howie. Believe it or not, Howie's played golf on a big course. We had a ball. brothers played golf and Herd Logan and Mahawi in Trinidad. Brother Cross hadn't even done that. And golf is a neutral thing, so is football. Well, in golf, do you know that there are innumerable good qualities that are taught by the game of golf? I'm not saying it'll save you, it won't. But it teaches you character, discipline. It teaches you not to cheat. It teaches good things. It can be used for good or bad. Football can be used for good or bad. Football can be used for bad when people get a concussion, and a young boy got a concussion the other day and died. That's a bad thing. But it's a neutral thing. It can also be used for good. I'm going to tell you this morning 2 stories of how it's used for good. Last night they had the Heisman Trophy. That's to the best football player in the country every year. You had Derek, I forgot his name, Henry, Alabama running back. You had another running back, McCaffrey from Stanford, and you had my Deshaun Watson, the quarterback of Clemson, the 3 finalists. Well, they had a documentary and told about these guys. And they also told about Tony Elliott, not our Elliott, but Tony Elliott, who is the offensive coordinator for the Clemson Tigers. And they took us back to Sycamore Tree. Tony Elliott had an experience with Sycamore Street, and I want to tell you about it. When he was a young man, a baby, his mother was left by her husband because it was a bad marriage, and they ended up on the street as street people. And she would drag him and his sister along from one parking lot after another to sleep at night. They would go behind the Walmart and hide. Any place they could find to hide at night to sleep. They were street people. Now, a church came along and helped them out, helped them get on their feet. They got a place to live. The mother divorced her husband, who treated her like a dog, and got a new husband. And Tony Elliott was about 9 years old. And one day, his mother went downtown to downtown Charleston. And when she got to Sycamore Street, a car, as she was driving, came through the intersection and ran right into her mother's car and killed her on the spot. Killed her dead on Sycamore Street. The Sycamore Street was a neutral street. It's just a thing. But a tragedy happened there. And then he had to live with that. 9 years old. He ended up staying with his grandmother. Now this is one of the women I want to talk about in comparing to the other 2 women. Tony Elliott's grandmother raised him to be a Christian young man. She took it upon herself. Matter of fact, she didn't like the new father, and she moved him into her house. She didn't have much, but she raised him, and she taught him life. And she sowed good into Tony Elliott. And then he went to Clemson University and played wide receiver. And then he somehow got on the staff to be a coach and assistant coach. And on that same staff was a guy named Dabo Sweeney. Dabo Sweeney got elevated to be the head coach of our Clemson Tigers a few years ago. And Tony was still a coach doing menial stuff. But this is really special. You see, Dabo Swinney loves the Lord. He's a Christian. Now, he don't have to be, but God chose him. There's a lot of coaches in football that aren't Christians, but there's a lot of good in football as well. There's a lot of discipline that's taught. There's teamwork that's taught. There's love that's taught. And Dabo called Tony Elliott and said, Tony, I want you to come over to my house. I got to talk to you. He said, where do you live, Coach? He said, I know this is in Clemson. But I live on Sycamore Street. And Tony Elliott was shaken when he heard that. Because all the bad memories he had of Sycamore Street were about his dead mother. And now God had taken him, a simplistic little thing like Sycamore Street, and used it for his glory. His mother died on Sycamore Street in Charleston. Dabo Swinney lived on Sycamore Street in Clemson, or Anderson. And Tony Elliott is about to receive one of the greatest blessings in his whole life. Dabo called him over, he came over. And he looked at him and he said, you know, I know about Sycamore Street. And I know your mother died. And he said, I want this Sycamore Street to be a beginning and a re-beginning of the rest of your life. See, God can take a bad Sycamore Street and He can turn it into a good Sycamore Street. He said, Tony, how would you like to be my offensive coordinator? And Tony Elliott, who grew up a street person and never really got over it emotionally, said, Coach, you got to be kidding, you know where I come from. And Dabo said, look, it doesn't matter where you come from. It matters where you're going. And Tony Elliott said, they were the happiest day of his life. Now, you got two Christians there. This year, those two Christians and the other people who are on the staff, and as far as I know, everybody on the staff is Christians, became the #1 team in the land. And for 6 straight weeks have been voted #1 in the country. They're about to go to the college playoff. They play Oklahoma, and if they win that game, they play the Oklahoma and Michigan State, and they may win the national championship. All this came from Sycamore Street. So I don't know what your Sycamore Street is today, but remember, it can be overcome, it can be conquered, and God can change it for good. I want to tell you about one more mother and through. Deshaun Watson finished 3 last night. He didn't win the Heisman, but he's taking Clemson to be the #1 team in the nation. Deshaun Watson grew up in Gainesville, Georgia, in a place where they was filled with poverty. Same story. His mother too had a bad marriage. And then when he was 9, 10, 11 years old, he came one day, his mother said, Deshaun, sit down, I want to talk to you. He said, the doctor says I have cancer. And he said, are you going to die? Now this is the second mother in comparison with the 2 mothers in the Old Testament. And she said, I don't think so, but I think they're going to have to cut out my tongue because the cancer is in my tongue. I mean, these are real life stories. Dabo said last night, he said, it's not just about football. He said, I took my father last year every single day for months to chemotherapy and brought him back until he died just before the season began. And he's using Christianity to help other people. And so Deshaun's mother had the surgery at Emory University. To this day, she can't talk. She was on the program last night and she sat there, and her sister came and talked for her as Deshaun was being interviewed with Coach Sweeney there. And she worked like a dog all of her life after the cancer to raise Deshaun and put him in Clemson University. They came from nothing. And now God has chosen to use them. And I think it's for good. I think it's for a good testimony. You've got Christian people here talking about the Lord on national TV and everybody in the country watching. It's got to be a good testimony. Derrick Henry, who won the award last night, got up on the platform, and the first thing he said was, "I love the Lord Jesus Christ." He said, "I thank God He's given me these gifts, and I thank God for, first of all that He's done to get me to this place." And he too came from a very poor, destitute background. So I'm just saying that God can use anything. He can use anything in your life. He can use any inanimate object. He can use the bad things that have happened to you if you'll get right with Him to make good things happen, to give Him the glory. When Clemson scores a touchdown on the sidelines, I watched Dabo go along and do this. It's giving God the glory. It depends on what you want to do with it. It also depends on the sovereignty of God and what He wants to do with it. So Sycamore Street to me is going to be a blessing the rest of my life. I'm going to remember it. It made an impact on my life last night. Take your Sycamore Streets and use them for the glory of God. And God will be well pleased. Howie, would you lead us in a closing prayer?